I was like, I know, I was like, oh.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gene Policinski. I'm president of the Museum Institute, which is part of the Freedom Forum, and through the years has taken on responsibility for the annual Al Newharth Excellence in the Media Award. As you know, a few years ago, we began to do effectively a dual presentation where we present the award in Washington at the museum, and then we have a program at the University of South Dakota, our partner in presenting the annual award, Al, of course, being a graduate of USD. And so we're here today with the 2017 recipient of that award, Marty Baron, who is the executive editor of the Washington Post. And this is an opportunity for some questions from journalists who are here in the room. And I think with that, it's just an opportunity to ask questions of our 2017 recipient. And I emphasize that because while we're in 2018, what we ask the recipients to do is sometime within the next academic year come to campus. So it is the 2017 Al Newharth Award for Excellence in the Media.
I wasn't late.
No, he's on time. Good. He's on time.
On time. All right, good.
Questions, please.
Fire away.
Well, thank you for being here. Yeah, right.
That's the kind of press conference I like.
That's right. So, sir, question?
Oh, sure. So, Marty, would you say that having a Washington Post like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, does that leave you vulnerable to attacks from people like Donald Trump who will say that you're biased in favor of Amazon or anything of that nature?
Well, he has said that, so I suppose you could say it leaves us vulnerable, but I think that, you know, you have to look at actually our journalism, and I think our journalism has held up, it's been validated. Things that sometimes the president has said were untrue, were fake news, within a matter of days they actually proved to be true. And then the president himself actually acknowledged they were true. Right now, I'm just thinking of the instance where we had reported that he had made the decision to fire his national security advisor, General McMaster. He denounced that, said that that was untrue, that he had a fabulous relationship with his national security advisor, and then within a matter of a day or two, he fired his national security advisor. So, you know, the ownership, I suppose, regardless of what our ownership would be, it could make us subject to criticism, and we're going to be criticized regardless of what our ownership is. Keep in mind that throughout, from one administration to the next, the press has been criticized, the Washington Post has been criticized, regardless of whether it was a Republican or Democratic administration. So that's just the nature of the job.
You know, if I could respond just in my career, I spent a lot of years at Gannett, and there was a lot of criticism of Gannett as so-called chain or group versus the value of an individual owner. And, you know, again, I think the motives of an owner, or whether it's a group or an individual, are always out there. If you're transparent about it, people will ask questions. It really doesn't devolve to one particular personality. And that's just a characteristic, I think, of people who want to look at what are the motives of a news operation.
And I think it's important to point out that the president's allegations about our owner are incorrect. I mean, he makes it seem as if our owner is exercising influence over the journalism that we practice at the Post, and our owner doesn't do that. He gets involved in our business strategies and our business tactics, a whole range of things from pricing to technology, but he hasn't once told us a story to do. He hasn't once told us a story not to do. He hasn't critiqued a story, he hasn't criticized a story, he hasn't suppressed a story, he hasn't done any of that. And the president hasn't produced any evidence that he has. And there's a reason that the president hasn't produced any such evidence, and that's because there is no evidence.
When the president says something mean attacks you, how do you decide whether or not to cover that in any way? The New York Times will respond sometimes. How do you decide whether, well, maybe we should just let that go?
Well, I think the Times has chosen to respond on Twitter when he says something via Twitter about them. You know, we judge them individually, case by case. We find there are very few cases where it makes sense for us to respond. I mean, why get into sort of a duel on Twitter? It makes no sense whatsoever. We do cover what he says. We do report on his criticism of us. So it's not as if we're going to ignore what the president has to say about the Washington Post or about our owner. We've covered that quite aggressively and energetically. So we're not hiding anything. We'll certainly cover all of that. But we don't feel compelled to get onto Twitter and knock heads with him on Twitter. Our general view is that doesn't serve any useful purpose.
One thing I might ask is if you would, just since we know who we are, if you could just give us an idea of who you are and what operation you're from, just helps us a little bit.
I'm Mason Dock from the Sioux City Journal.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I'm David Lias. I'm the editor of the Play Talk here in Vermilion. This is a rather broad, general question, but can you kind of give us an idea of how life has changed at your newspaper in the last year and a half?
Sure, I'll try.
Just to pick a
give
time
sense
frame out of the
that.
air. Yeah.
I'm a little more tired than I was before, although I was tired before too. Look, I mean, it's hard to know from day to day what exactly is going to happen that day in terms of covering the White House. There are a lot of other things we cover, but in terms of covering the White House. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, the president will be tweeting. So we don't know what he's going to be tweeting about. And he may cover a range of subjects within the matter of a half an hour. And there was no warning that he would be covering those, so we're going to have to jump into those subjects pretty quickly. And then at 10 o'clock at night, he may get a second wind, and he's tweeting again on an entirely different subject, and so we'll have to cover that. So the day is a long one, and it's an unpredictable one. That's number one. Number two is that we're under constant attack by the president. We've had presidents who criticize us, but we haven't had presidents before in recent memory, probably not since the Nixon administration, that have actually sought to subvert the press, to undermine the credibility of the press with the American public, and who have consistently denigrated, demeaned, and tried to marginalize and actually dehumanize the press. We haven't encountered that before, and so that's an environment that's quite new to us. I think what has happened there is another thing that's affected us, and that is it's led to a higher degree of polarization in American society. We already have had a high degree of polarization even prior to this administration, but this has aggravated it, and we have to deal with that kind of environment as well, because people take sides. They view us as being on one side or another, and then they will join in any attack, for example, that the president may initiate. Now, I have to say that we've had some time to get used to that because the president did that when he wasn't president. He did that as a candidate for the presidency as well. And so I would say that over those 2 years of his candidacy, we kind of got used to it. So we were at least prepared in that way for this administration. Other questions? Dive in.
I'll go. Katie Koppel from the News in Sioux City. In the day and age of social media and the need to be first, how does the Post handle not only being the news out there when we need to know it, but being first and being correct?
Yeah, well, obviously these days people expect to get news instantaneously. There are alerts that give you the news immediately after something occurs, and we want to be the first, if at all possible, with an alert, because then people will come to rely on us as the source of information, and we will fulfill their desire for immediate information. But one thing we do not want to do is to put out an alert or put out any information before we've actually verified it, and to make sure that it's accurate, it's fairly presented, that sort of thing. So we have to be very careful with these alerts that we not put out anything that's incorrect. It's not that we or anybody else has never made a mistake, but that's our objective. We want to be fast. But you want to make sure that you're not.